So what if the person transporting your vulnerable loved one uh, wasn't actually properly trained?
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
Right. I mean, just think about that scenario for a second. You wave goodbye as your grandmother, or, maybe your spouse who's recovering from major surgery is being wheeled up a hydraulic ramp into the back of a van,
Hmm.
and you just sort of let out this sigh of relief, assuming they're in safe, capable hands. But what if the person behind the wheel is essentially just like a gig economy driver, like someone who just happened to pass a basic background check and, I don't know, watched a 15-minute orientation video?
Well, it is a genuinely terrifying thought when you actually strip away the assumptions we all make.
Hmm.
And the unsettling truth here is that that scenario is actually a reality for a lot of families.
Yeah.
Mostly because they just misunderstand what this specific slice of the transportation industry entails and, what they should actually be demanding from it.
Which is exactly why we're dedicating today's deep dive to unpacking all of this. Because most people hear the term non-emergency medical transportation.
Or NEMT, for short.
Right, NEMT. They hear that and they just picture a specialized taxi service. They assume it's just, catching a ride in a slightly larger vehicle.
Exactly.
But according to the research we're analyzing today, specifically the SwiftAid Guide to Professional NEMT Standards, treating this like a taxi service is a massive and honestly potentially dangerous misconception.
It really is.
So our mission today is to uncover what you, the listener, should realistically expect from a professional provider, whether you're a patient or a caregiver or even a healthcare professional managing logistics.
Yeah, and to really get into the mechanics of this, I think we first need to establish a firm definition of what NEMT actually is, and more importantly, who relies on it.
Okay, set the foundation for us.
Right, so we're talking about a highly specialized transportation service. It's for individuals who, well, they aren't in an immediate life-threatening emergency, right? Like they don't need sirens and flashing lights.
No ambulances.
Right, but they still require significant medical assistance or specialized equipment or just a highly trained professional to safely get them to and from their healthcare appointments.
Got it.
So the user base is, dialysis patients who are just severely fatigued after a treatment, or individuals who permanently use those heavy motorized wheelchairs,
Oh,
or elderly patients dealing with cognitive decline,
yeah.
or even just someone being discharged from a hospital who is still heavily medicated from major surgery.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the core philosophy of this guide correctly, the absolute biggest misconception we need to clear up right now is just how people categorize this service.
Absolutely.
Viewing an NEMT driver as just a taxi driver is fundamentally flawed. I mean, it would be like viewing a paramedic as just a fast Uber driver who happens to have, some bandages in the trunk.
That's a really good analogy.
Right. It totally misses the healthcare component because
Yeah.
you'd never expect your neighborhood rideshare driver to know the biomechanics of safely transferring a patient with a freshly fractured hip.
Exactly, because NEMT operates as an active extension of patient care.
Right.
It's an extension of the healthcare continuum. So the baseline expectations for these services, they really cannot be modeled after rideshare apps. They have to mirror clinical healthcare standards.
Which is a huge shift in perspective.
It's a completely different operational paradigm.
So, knowing that the standards are modeled after clinical care, let's look at the baseline expectations outlined in this SwiftAid guide. Because I always just assumed any van with a ramp rolling around the city was basically operating on the same level.
Yeah, a little bit of people do.
But the requirements before the vehicle even moves are pretty rigorous. The guide breaks down four, non-negotiable pillars:
Mhm.
strict on-time performance, vehicles that are ADA compliant and clinically clean, proactive communication, and then accurately matching the correct level of medical service to the patient.
Well, let me step into the shoes of the listener for a second and just play the challenger here.
Go for it.
Because if I look at those first few pillars, being on time, having a clean vehicle, communicating well, isn't that just standard table stakes for any functional business?
Right, like standard customer service.
Yeah. I mean, shouldn't any transportation company, from a bus line to a private car service, be doing that anyway? Why does this guide treat on-time performance like it's this massive medical metric?
See, I had the exact same thought when I first read through the materials because, if your ride to the airport is 40 minutes late, you miss a flight.
Right.
You sit at the terminal, you have to buy a new ticket, you're annoyed. It's a massive inconvenience. But the stakes in the NEMT world are just entirely different.
They're literally life and death in some cases.
Wow, really?
Yeah, think about the broader healthcare context. If an NEMT ride is 40 minutes late, a patient might miss a strict dialysis window.
Oh, because those centers run on tight schedules.
Incredibly tight schedules. If you miss your slot, you might not get filtered that day. And that means toxins literally build up in your
That's
bloodstream.
terrifying.
Or consider a cancer patient missing a chemotherapy session they've been waiting 3 weeks to secure. In this context, on-time performance isn't about saving a patient from being annoyed. It's about medical compliance.
So a delayed arrival can actually trigger a cascade of negative health outcomes.
Exactly, leading directly to hospital readmissions in a lot of cases.
Okay, that totally reframes the concept of a schedule for me. And I want to circle back to that fourth pillar I mentioned, which is matching the correct level of service.
Right.
The source guide categorizes these as ambulatory, wheelchair, ambulette, and stretcher transports. So for anyone who hasn't had to book one of these before, what is the mechanical difference there and why is it so critical to get that right?
Well, it comes down to physical support and safety engineering. So ambulatory means the patient can walk, but they might need a steadying hand or like a cane.
Okay, pretty straightforward.
Wheelchair transport is also fairly standard.
Mm-hmm.
But an ambulette is specifically designed with heavy-duty hydraulic lifts and specialized floor tracking.
Because some wheelchairs are huge.
Right. It's to accommodate those non-collapsible or heavy motorized chairs that you absolutely cannot just fold up and toss in a trunk.
Huh.
And then a stretcher transport is essentially a non-emergency ambulance setup for patients who have to remain completely flat, completely supine.
Which means you definitely can't just substitute one for the other if, say, the company is running low on a certain vehicle type that day.
Oh, doing that is incredibly dangerous. Like, if a patient requires a stretcher because they lack upper body control or maybe they have severe spinal issues,
Yeah.
putting them in a wheelchair van just because it's cheaper or more available,
Right.
that's straight-up medical negligence. Being forced to sit upright when you're clinically advised not to, I mean, that can compromise their airway. It can induce severe pressure ulcers or just result in excruciating pain.
So choosing the vehicle is an actual medical triage decision.
Exactly. It's not just a logistical preference based on what van happens to be parked in the lot.
Well, if assigning the wrong vehicle is that medically perilous, it makes me realize how vital the human element is in all of this. Because, the vehicle could be this state-of-the-art, perfectly sanitized machine, and the dispatch schedule could be flawlessly optimized. But none of that matters without the person behind the wheel. The entire system hinges on driver training.
100%.
And this is where it gets really interesting because the SwiftAid guide breaks this training down into 6 core areas, and they are vastly more intense than I would have ever guessed.
The rigor really is necessary, though, because the driver is the physical, tangible link between the safety of a patient's home and the clinical environment of their care. They're operating out in the wild.
Right, far away from the controlled hospital ward. So let's unpack these 6 areas. First up is patient assistance and mobility. The guide explicitly details that drivers must master proper lifting mechanics.
Yeah, they aren't just opening doors for people. They are physically bearing weight. They have to know how to maneuver walkers, how to navigate steep, uneven residential ramps. And critically, they have to maintain the patient's dignity while doing all of that.
I feel like that dignity aspect is huge.
It's massive. Just imagine the vulnerability of being suspended in the air on a hydraulic lift, entirely dependent on a total stranger. A trained driver knows how to talk a patient through that process so they actually feel secure, rather than treating them like, cargo being loaded onto a freight truck.
Okay, the second area is wheelchair securement, which the guide highlights as an absolute non-negotiable necessity. It mentions a 4-point tie-down system. How does that actually work mechanically?
So a proper 4-point system involves heavy-duty retractors that actually anchor directly into steel tracks bolted to the van's chassis.
Okay, so it's bolted to the actual frame of the van.
Yes, and the driver has to attach 4 separate specialized hooks to very specific structurally reinforced points on the wheelchair frame itself.
Not the wheels.
No, not the wheels, not the armrests, the solid frame. And then they have to tension them correctly to essentially make that wheelchair one solid piece with the vehicle. Plus, they have to apply a completely separate lap and shoulder belt system directly to the passenger.
So if a driver skips even one of those steps because, they're running late or rushing to their next pickup,
then the physics become absolutely terrifying. A motorized wheelchair can easily weigh 300 pounds or more.
wow.
Yeah, so if it's only secured by 2 points, or if the driver just relies on the wheelchair's own wheel locks, which, by the way, are absolutely useless in a vehicular collision,
Oh, I bet.
That chair becomes a 300-pound projectile the second the van hits a major pothole or it has to brake suddenly. The patient is almost guaranteed to suffer catastrophic injuries.
Man, that perfectly sets up the third area, defensive driving. Because the guide notes that in NEMT, defensive driving doesn't just mean, like, avoiding accidents. It means prioritizing really smooth, anticipated braking over just getting there fast.
Right, because we've all been in a car with a jerky driver.
Oh, yeah.
But a hard brake in a standard sedan usually just means, what, you spill your coffee or the seatbelt locks up uncomfortably?
Yeah, it's annoying, but fun.
But apply that same hard brake in an NEMT van carrying a frail elderly patient with severe osteoporosis. That sudden jolt doesn't just spill coffee. It can literally cause a bone fracture, or it could dislodge a surgical drain.
So they have to drive incredibly smoothly.
The driver basically has to drive as if they're balancing a full glass of water on the dashboard at all times.
Now, the fourth area of training really caught my attention because it involves the administrative side, which is HIPAA awareness. Now, anyone who follows the healthcare industry knows HIPAA is non-negotiable.
Oh, absolutely.
But seeing it applied so strictly to transport drivers is fascinating. What are the actual vulnerability vectors here? I mean, it's not like drivers are carrying a patient's full medical chart and accidentally leaving it on the bus seat.
Right. The breaches in NEMT are usually much more subtle, which is exactly why the training has to be so specific. It often happens through unsecured communication.
Like what?
Well, an untrained dispatcher might broadcast over an open radio, hey, I need you to pick up John Smith at the oncology clinic.
Oh, so they're essentially broadcasting his cancer diagnosis to anyone within earshot of the van.
Exactly. Or a driver, just trying to be friendly, might casually mention to a patient's neighbor, yeah, I drop him off at the dialysis center 3 times a week. That is a massive violation of federal medical privacy laws, even if the intent was entirely innocent.
Wait, are drivers really trained for all that? Because the fifth and sixth areas kind of round out the human side. Emergency awareness and infection control, and then compassion and customer service.
So they absolutely should be trained for it.
Because they have to recognize subtle signs of distress, right? Like someone turning pale or sweating, even in non-emergencies. And maintain strict sanitation and deal with passengers who might be confused or anxious or lashing out because they're in physical pain.
It's an incredibly demanding job profile.
Yeah.
I mean, you're asking someone to be part mechanic, part medical observer, and part therapist all at once.
So what happens if they aren't trained for this? Because I've definitely seen transport vans out in the wild where the driver is like blasting loud music. They seem super rushed and they just look incredibly stressed out. I definitely don't always get the vibe that they've passed some rigorous multi-tiered medical mobility curriculum.
Well, that observation hits on the core divide in the whole industry. Because the gap between a professional elite provider and a low-tier operator almost entirely comes down to whether this training is actually enforced or if it's literally just a signature on a piece of paper. When providers cut corners on training just to save a few bucks, the consequences fall directly on the most vulnerable people. And the risks aren't just massive liability for the company and the hospital, although that is true.
Yeah.
It results in this terrible, undignified experience that strips patients of their autonomy and basic safety.
So if the training is supposed to be this rigorous, but we know corner cutting happens, how are families supposed to know if their driver actually passed muster? Are there practical red flags you can spot before the van even leaves the driveway?
Absolutely. The SwiftAid guidelines provide a really clear baseline, so the deviations become pretty obvious. The most glaring red flag is just a driver who fumbles in the vehicle's equipment.
Oh, like they don't know how to use the lift.
Exactly. If they seem unsure of how to deploy the hydraulic ramp, or if they struggle to locate those anchor points for the wheelchair we talked about, that is an immediate sign of inadequate training.
The source also lists poor communication as a major warning sign. Like when a ride is delayed and you're just stuck listening to infinite dispatch hold music and you can't get a straight answer on where the van actually is.
Yes.
Or a dirty vehicle, which, given the infection control requirements we just discussed, is completely unacceptable.
Right. The dirty interior isn't just unprofessional. For a patient with a compromised immune system who just got out of surgery, a dirty van is a literal biohazard. And to really understand why these red flags matter so deeply, we have to synthesize the impact across 3 distinct groups: the patients, their families, and the healthcare facilities themselves.
Okay, let's start with the patients. Because when these red flags are present, they're the ones absorbing the immediate physical and emotional impact.
They are. And they lose their safety, their comfort, and their trust. A patient in this system should always feel safe and informed. They should never be left waiting on some scorching sidewalk outside a clinic, feeling neglected and wondering if they've just been forgotten.
I can't even imagine the stress that puts on the second group you mentioned, the families and caregivers.
It's immense.
I mean, picture a daughter trying to manage her elderly mother's healthcare logistics. She's working a full-time job. She spends her entire lunch break navigating these phone trees just to secure this ride.
Yep.
And then she has to hand her mother over to a driver who seems impatient or untrained. The sheer anxiety of wondering, will my mom make it home safely today, is just an incredible emotional toll. They completely lose that peace of mind and reliability they're depending on.
And that stress eventually trickles up to the third group, which is the broader healthcare system itself.
Yeah.
Because hospitals and specialized clinics suffer measurable operational damage from bad NEMT providers.
Wait, how does a bad van ride actually impact a whole hospital's operations?
Oh, it creates a massive logistical bottleneck. So imagine a large urban hospital. A patient on the third floor is officially cleared for discharge at, say, 10:00 a.m., but their transport van is 3 hours late. That means that patient occupies that bed until 1:00 p.m. Meanwhile, down in the emergency room, there's a critically ill patient waiting for that exact bed.
Oh, wow.
Because the bed is occupied, the ER backs up, and if the ER backs up enough, the hospital actually has to divert incoming ambulances to other facilities.
Wait, really? A single poorly trained driver being 3 hours late can literally cause an ambulance diversion?
Yes, it happens. It's a staggering ripple effect. One late van effectively gridlocks a multi-million-dollar medical facility. It traumatizes a patient, and it completely ruins a family's day.
That is insane. So knowing that human error and, frankly, bad actors exist in any industry, how do we fix this? We can't just operate on the honor system when the stakes are hospital gridlock and patient injury.
No, we definitely can't. And this is exactly why professional NEM2 providers have to use objective technological tools to enforce transparency and accountability.
Okay, so let's talk about the tech. The SwiftAid guide outlines several of these tools, primarily GPS tracking of the vehicles, digital trip verification, and highly specific time-stamped logs of exactly when a patient was picked up, loaded, and dropped off.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanism behind why these tools are required is fascinating. Because historically, the medical transport industry has dealt with significant vulnerabilities when it comes to fraud.
Really? Fraud in medical transport?
Oh, yeah. Unscrupulous, low-tier companies might engage in what the industry calls ghost rides.
Wait, what? How does a ghost ride actually happen?
Basically, a provider would submit billing to Medicaid or an insurance company for transporting a patient, claiming the ride took place, when in reality, the van never even moved.
You're kidding?
Or, another common one, they might bill for a highly expensive specialized wheelchair transport, but the patient actually just walked out of their house and sat in the front seat of a regular sedan.
So they upcharge for medical equipment that was never even used.
Precisely. It's a huge issue. So by implementing digital trip verification and real-time GPS timestamps, the system physically prevents this kind of fraud. It provides an unalterable digital footprint, proving that the patient was actually in the vehicle, the route was taken, and the specific billed level of care was actually provided.
That makes total sense. Which brings us to the ultimate benchmark outlined in the source material. It introduces SwiftAid Transport as the model for what a high-quality provider actually looks like in practice.
Right.
And what's compelling to me isn't that they have a fleet of shiny new vans, it's their underlying operational philosophy, They utilize structured ongoing training programs, they enforce strict professional standards, they're intentionally building a workforce that actually understands its crucial role in the healthcare continuum, rather than just, hiring gig workers looking to make a few quick bucks between food delivery runs.
But, looking at all this heavy technology and strict compliance tracking, it raises a deeper philosophical question. Does automating all of this tracking and structure replace the human element? Because a GPS algorithm can definitively prove that a driver arrived at 2:00 p.m. sharp, sure.
Right.
But an algorithm cannot tell you if the driver was kind. A digital timestamp can't detect if a patient was wincing in pain, which would prompt a really perceptive driver to actively choose a slightly longer but much smoother route just to avoid road construction and potholes.
That is the ultimate tension here, isn't it? The balance between cold, hard logistics and warm patient care. How do the best providers reconcile that?
Well, the paradigm shift happens when you realize that technology shouldn't be used to replace the human caregiver. It should be used to automate the compliance so that the driver can actually afford to be human.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because when a driver isn't manually filling out dense paper logs or stressing out about getting lost because of poor routing or arguing with dispatch over a crackly radio, their cognitive load is freed up.
That makes so much sense.
The technology handles the rules, the safety netting, and the logistics. And that allows the actual professional sitting in the driver's seat to focus entirely on the dignity and comfort of the vulnerable human being sitting in the back.
I absolutely love that framing. The technology automates the compliance, freeing the driver up to actually be a caregiver. It shifts the entire mindset from a gig economy task of, you know, moving an object from point A to point B to a care economy mission of moving a person safely.
It changes everything about how the service is delivered.
It really does. Well, as we wrap up today's deep dive into these standards, I want to leave you with one core unifying takeaway. At the end of the day, NEMT isn't just about getting from point A to point B. It's about how safely, respectfully, and professionally that journey is handled. A transport provider is truly only as good as the drivers they put behind the wheel.
Absolutely. And to build on that, here's a final thought to ponder as you navigate this system for yourself or your family in the future.
Let's hear it.
If we, as a society, start viewing NEMT drivers as the crucial first and last links in the healthcare chain rather than just chauffeurs, how might that completely change the way we value and fund and ultimately demand excellence from the entire medical transport industry?
That is a brilliant question to end on, because if the MRI machine finds the issue and the surgeon fixes it, the NEMT driver is the one making sure you actually get to the hospital to have it done safely and with your dignity intact. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those tough questions, keep your eyes open for those red flags, and always demand the highest standard of care for yourselves and your loved ones. We'll catch you next time.